Part 1. The Kimi K3 Shockwave. Did a new AI just disrupt Silicon Valley overnight? That is the central question for today's explainer. And to answer it, we don't have to rely on hot takes or opinions. We can just look straight at the hard data. For the last couple of years, the accepted narrative was basically that US companies had this completely unbreakable lead in frontier AI. But if you look at the public traffic data, it's telling a totally different story right now, and it's one that is making American tech executives incredibly nervous. Just look at the sheer dominance of the blue section right there. According to Bloomberg's recent analysis of Open Router's public traffic data, Chinese models actually accounted for 58% of total usage, and it even peaked at 63% during some weeks. US and other models, they're sitting at just 42%. Now, to give you some perspective on how crazy fast this shift is, at the beginning of 2025, which was roughly a year ago, Chinese models accounted for less than 10% of usage. Less than 10. That is a staggering market capture in just a blink of an eye. And the raw volume we're talking about here is just mind-blowing. 18 trillion? In a single week, Chinese models processed roughly 18 trillion tokens. To put that into a relatable scale, US models processed about 5.5 trillion tokens in that exact same time frame. The sheer scale of adoption is totally unprecedented. And the massive driver behind this recent crazy spike? Yep, it's the introduction of Moonshot AI's Kimi K3. Moving into part 2, under the hood. So what makes it so special? Well, the first massive advantage is the pricing. For developers, Kimi K3's API costs just $15 per million output tokens. Now sure, that might be slightly more expensive than a few other Chinese models out there like DeepSeek, but it is aggressively cheap compared to its US counterparts. Actually, it costs less than a third of Anthropic's Claude Fable 5. And when you're a startup processing billions of tokens, that price difference? That's literally the difference between going bankrupt and turning a profit. But here's the kicker. K3 isn't just cheap. It is operating at a cutting-edge, frontier level of intelligence. This thing is an absolute behemoth with 2.8 trillion parameters. Basically, think of that as the raw size of its artificial brain. It also boasts a 1 million token context window, which gives it this massive short-term memory for chewing through huge documents. On the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index, it scores a 57, which actually beats out Claude Opus 4.8. Plus, it hit #1 on the Arena Coding leaderboard within 24 hours of its release. No way, right? And honestly, maybe the most impressive part is its native multimodal architecture. It can natively process video. In one test, K3 actually edited its own teaser video from 56 source clips. It did the motion match cuts, the audio processing, stuff that would easily take a human editor a couple of days. So you've got top-tier performance, rock-bottom pricing, and open access. It is a really potent combination. Which brings us to part 3, Silicon Valley's open secret. Let's actually trace how deeply embedded this technology already is in America's top tech companies. Before K3 even came out, Moonshot released the open-weight Kimi K2.5 model. Then the super popular coding tool Cursor built its core Composer 2 feature running directly on K2.5. And guess who just acquired Cursor for approximately $60 billion? SpaceX. Right? So the crucial takeaway here is that a massive American aerospace company is now acquiring infrastructure that is running directly on Chinese open-source AI. And it definitely doesn't stop there. DoorDash's CTO publicly stated that they assign low-level tasks to Kimi K2.6. Thinking Machines uses K2.5 to generate early post-training data for their own models. The reliance across the industry is so deep that nearly 200 Silicon Valley startups actually signed a joint letter to the Trump administration. They explicitly warned that banning these open-source Chinese models would cause, quote, hundreds of companies to die instantly. For these American developers, Kimi isn't some foreign enemy. It's an absolute lifeline they're desperate to keep using. All right, let's pivot to part 4, the Washington backlash. To really grasp the US government's anger over all this, we first need to define a concept called distillation. Distillation is essentially when you train a smaller new AI model using the highly refined outputs and data generated by a larger existing model. It's actually a pretty common practice in tech, but it happens to be the exact mechanism Washington is accusing Moonshot of weaponizing in a covert way. Because the allegations being lobbed at Moonshot are incredibly severe, the White House is claiming that Moonshot didn't just build K3 from scratch, but rather that they illegitimately distilled Anthropic's Fable model to do it. Furthermore, they allege Moonshot built a covert internal platform to rapidly switch access methods specifically to avoid detection by Anthropic.
Add to that claims that Moonshot used banned top-tier NVIDIA GB300 chips in Thailand to bypass export controls. I mean, the situation is so tense right now that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent actually went on television to threaten direct U.S. sanctions for what he essentially called flat-out intellectual property theft.
And this sparks part 5, the open source debate. This whole situation has really sparked an ideological war in the U.S. tech sector. Let's look at the first camp, basically the hawks. Michael Kratsios from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy stated, large-scale, covert industrial distillation aimed at stealing proprietary U.S. technology and undermining American research is unacceptable. This perfectly captures that hawkish national security perspective. The fear that releasing these super powerful models as open weight is effectively just industrial espionage that feeds foreign capabilities. Then you have the closed-source U.S. labs. Dean Ball, who is the head of strategic futures at OpenAI, had a highly provocative take. He stated that releasing such a powerful model as openweight pushes the technology industry toward, quote, full AI communism. His core argument is that giving away this level of technology for free completely erodes the profit margins required to continually invest in the massively expensive hardware infrastructure needed to build the next generation of AI. But then, contrast those views with what Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, had to say. He explicitly stated that U.S. companies, quote, absolutely should be allowed to use Chinese models. This just brilliantly illustrates the deep polarization going on. On one side, you have the White House and OpenAI crying foul and warning of a systemic collapse, but on the other side, the CEO of the world's most valuable chip company, along with hundreds of U.S. startups, are arguing that access to these open-source models is vital for American innovation to survive. And amidst all of this chaos, all the threats of sanctions, and this giant ideological debate, Moonshot AI is just moving full steam ahead. The number to focus on here is $50 billion. Reports are indicating that Moonshot is currently on a trajectory to raise fresh capital at a staggering $50 billion valuation, right ahead of an initial public offering in Hong Kong. The demand for K3 was actually so intense when it launched that they temporarily had to completely stop new registrations. So that leaves us with one final crucial question to ponder as we wrap up today's explainer. Will the global AI race be won by closed-source infrastructure or open-weight disruption? Kimi K3 has proven, without a doubt, that the moat around proprietary U.S. models might not be nearly as wide as we thought it was. Can the multi-billion-dollar walled gardens of Silicon Valley really compete with near-frontier intelligence that's just being given away to developers at a fraction of the cost? It is a massive geopolitical and technological chess match, and the next move is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. Thanks for learning with me today, and we'll see you in the next explainer.